Sarah Mitchell clutched little Emma's hand as they walked through the grand ballroom of the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island. The child's flower girl dress rustled with each step toward the altar where Isabella Winters, in a $30,000 Vera Wang gown, was about to marry Marcus Sterling, heir to a $300 million hotel empire. But Sarah had discovered something that morning that chilled her blood. Isabella wasn't who she claimed to be. The documents hidden in the bridal suite revealed a con orchestrated for years. When Sarah interrupted the ceremony, shouting, "Stop everything!" 200 guests from Manhattan's elite froze in shock. But what happened next, when Isabella's true identity came to light, transformed a fairy tale wedding into a scandal that would shake all of New England. Because sometimes it's the most humble person in the room who saves everyone from ruin. The Breakers' mansion gleamed under the June sun, its Gilded Age splendor overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Sarah Mitchell, 42 years old with 15 years of experience as a nanny for America's wealthiest families, adjusted the bow in Emma Sterling's hair for the 10th time as the 8-year-old bounced with excitement. Sarah had worked for the Sterling family for 5 years, since Emma's mother died in a car accident, leaving Marcus a devastated widower. In those years, she'd become more than just a nanny. She was the rock the family leaned on, the constant presence who'd helped father and daughter rebuild their lives. Marcus Sterling, 35, heir to a luxury hotel chain stretching from Boston to Miami, was a good man, but naive in love. His wife Catherine's death had devastated him, and for 2 years he'd lived only for Emma and work. Then, 18 months ago, he'd met Isabella Winters at a charity gala in Manhattan. Isabella had appeared like an angel, 28, blonde, elegant, with a sob story about being an orphan who'd made her way in fashion. She claimed to be an emerging designer, to have studied at Parsons, to have connections in high fashion that could benefit the Sterling hotels. Marcus fell hopelessly in love. Sarah had doubts from the beginning. Something about Isabella didn't add up. Her childhood stories changed in details. Her supposed fashion designs looked copied from magazines. Her French was shaky for someone who claimed to have interned in Paris for 2 years. But whenever Sarah tried to voice concerns, Marcus gently said she was just being protective, that she needed to give Isabella a chance. The morning of the wedding, while the mansion buzzed with preparations, Sarah helped Emma dress in the presidential suite. Isabella was next door with her bridesmaids, 3 women she'd introduced as childhood friends, but who barely seemed to know her. It was when Emma accidentally spilled orange juice on her dress that everything changed. Sarah rushed to Isabella's suite to grab towels from the bathroom, knowing the bride was at the hairdresser. But when she entered, she found the room empty and messy. On the bed was Isabella's open purse, documents spilling out. Sarah wasn't naturally nosy, but something made her look. What she saw took her breath away. There were passports, 3 different passports with Isabella's photo, but different names. Isabella Winters, Sophie Ross, Helen White. There were bank statements for shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and most damning, a handwritten letter that began, "Dear sister, the plan is working perfectly. After the wedding, we'll have access to everything." Sarah's hand shook as she read. The letter detailed an elaborate plan to marry Marcus, gain access to his accounts, gradually transfer funds to the Caymans, then disappear by faking her death in an accident during their Maldives honeymoon. There was even reference to an accomplice who would help with fake documents, someone called only R. Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly put everything back. Her heart pounded so hard she feared they'd hear it. She returned to Emma, cleaned her dress, but her mind raced. The ceremony was in an hour. 200 guests had arrived, including senators, CEOs, even a governor. The orchestra was tuning in the garden overlooking the ocean. She had to act. But how? She couldn't just approach Marcus with accusations without concrete proof. Isabella would deny everything. Paint her as a jealous nanny afraid of losing her position. She needed a plan. Sarah took her phone and quickly photographed the documents while Isabella was still at the hairdresser. Then she called her brother-in-law, Detective Robert Chen from the NYPD. She sent the photos via encrypted message. Robert responded within minutes. Those passports were on a stolen documents list. Isabella Winters was wanted for fraud in 3 states. But Robert was in New York. It would take at least 2 hours to arrive with backup. The ceremony was starting. Sarah watched Emma playing happily with her dolls, unaware her father was about to marry a criminal. She made a decision. She went down to the garden where guests were taking their seats. The altar was decorated with thousands of white roses. The ocean sparkled in the background. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Marcus was already at his place, handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo, smiling nervously. His best man, younger brother Luke, adjusted his tie. Sarah tried to approach Marcus, but security stopped her. She'd been told to stay with Emma in the back during the ceremony. She saw Isabella arrive, stunning in her designer gown, the veil covering her face, white peonies in her hands. She looked like the perfect bride. The officiant began the ceremony. The ritual words echoed in the garden, while Sarah felt time slipping away. When they reached the vows, Isabella recited hers with a sweet, moved voice. Some guests wiped away tears. "If anyone objects to this union, speak now, or forever hold your peace," the officiant said formally, expecting the usual silence. That's when Sarah stood, holding Emma's hand tight. Her voice rang clear and strong across the garden. "I object. Stop everything. This man is about to marry a con artist." The silence that fell over the garden was so thick, you could hear the ocean waves against the cliffs. 200 heads turned toward Sarah in synchronized motion. Isabella paled under her veil, her hands gripping the bouquet until her knuckles went white. Marcus turned in disbelief, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Little Emma, frightened by the sudden tension, pressed against Sarah's skirt, seeking comfort. The elderly officiant, a family friend of the Sterlings, stammered about the inappropriateness of the interruption. But Sarah was already walking down the aisle, each step crunching on the pebbled path. She held her phone high, the screen facing the guests. Isabella reacted first. With a trembling but controlled voice, she said Sarah was clearly confused, perhaps drunk, certainly jealous. Some guests murmured agreement. After all, who was this domestic worker to ruin such an important wedding? But Sarah wasn't intimidated. Reaching the altar, she addressed Marcus directly. She told him about finding documents in Isabella's suite, that she had proof Isabella wasn't who she claimed to be. Marcus looked at her as if she'd gone mad. But there was something in his eyes, a doubt that had perhaps always been there, buried under infatuation. Isabella intervened more forcefully, accusing Sarah of fabricating everything out of jealousy, of being obsessed with the family, of not accepting that Marcus had found a new mother for Emma. Her performance was convincing. Some bridesmaids gathered around her in support. That's when Sarah played her winning card. She showed the photo of the passport with the name Sophie Ross on her phone. The crowd gasped. It was clearly Isabella in the photo, but with a different name. Then she showed the second passport, Helen White. Murmurs among the guests grew louder. Isabella tried to grab the phone from Sarah's hands, but Luke, Marcus's brother, stopped her. Something in his expression had changed. He remembered inconsistencies in Isabella's stories, small lies he'd noticed, but ignored to not ruin his brother's happiness. Sarah continued, reading aloud parts of the letter she'd photographed. The words about the planned fake death in the Maldives made several elderly ladies scream. A prominent businessman stood and started calling the police. Isabella, seeing the situation collapse, attempted to flee. She kicked off her heels and ran toward the garden exit, her wedding dress catching on the rose bushes. But 2 security members, alerted by the commotion, blocked her. In the chaos that followed, with guests shouting and Isabella struggling, another truth emerged. One of the bridesmaids, panicking, confessed everything. They weren't Isabella's childhood friends. They were actresses paid to play the part. They didn't know about the criminal plan. They thought it was just a girl trying to impress her rich future husband. Isabella, cornered, changed tactics. She started crying, saying yes, she'd lied about her past, but only because she was ashamed of her true origins. She said she really loved Marcus, that the fake passports were from a dark period in her life she'd tried to leave behind. For a moment, Marcus seemed to waver. After all, he'd loved her for 18 months. Maybe there was an explanation. But Sarah wasn't finished. She asked Isabella to explain the letter about the simulated death, to explain the Cayman accounts, to explain who R was. Isabella's silence was deafening. She had no answer. The mask had completely fallen. At that moment, police sirens arrived. Robert, Sarah's brother-in-law, had managed to arrive earlier than expected with a team from Rhode Island State Police. When they entered the garden, Isabella tried one last desperate lie, saying Sarah had falsified everything, that it was a conspiracy. But Robert had done his research during the drive. Isabella Winters, real name Natasha Volkov, was wanted for marriage fraud in California, Nevada, and Florida. She'd already married and robbed 2 wealthy men, one of whom had committed suicide after discovering he'd lost everything. As Isabella was handcuffed, her gaze met Sarah's. For a moment, the mask of innocence disappeared completely, replaced by pure hatred. But there was something else, too. Respect, perhaps. The nanny had beaten the con artist at her own game. The Breakers' conference room had transformed into an impromptu police station. Wedding guests still in formal attire were being interviewed, while Marcus sat destroyed in a corner. Emma protected by Sarah in a separate room. Detective Chen conducted interrogations with precision. A disturbing picture quickly emerged. Isabella, real name Natasha Volkov, was part of an international organization specializing in romance scams targeting wealthy widowers. The most shocking confession came from Melissa, one of the fake bridesmaids.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
She revealed the mysterious R from the letter was Richard Blackstone, the hotel's manager, bribed with $50,000 to provide information about the Sterling family and facilitate the fake death plan in the Maldives. But the real bombshell exploded when Maldives police arrested Victoria, Isabella's sister, actually her lover and partner in crime. At the luxury resort, they found documents for new identities, tickets to Brazil, and access to accounts with $3 million already stolen from Marcus over recent months. Sarah provided crucial details: how Isabella had obtained powers of attorney for business accounts, had a Hamptons house put in her name, had manipulated Emma to soften Marcus whenever he had doubts. Sterling Sr., Marcus's father, arrived from Boston that evening, thanking Sarah with tears in his eyes for saving not just the family fortune, but possibly his son's life. The media exploded. "Wedding Scam of the Century" headlined the New York Times. Isabella became the face of manipulation. Her mugshot, contrasted with the wedding photo, went viral. A week later came the final revelation. The FBI had arrested other members of the organization. At least 20 victims across America, millions lost, 2 suicides. Isabella was a big fish in an international criminal network. During interrogation, Isabella showed no remorse. She said with contempt that rich men were easy prey, blinded by ego. Marcus had been one of the easiest, so desperate to give Emma a mother he'd believe anything. Her sociopathy was total and irreversible. 3 months after the failed wedding, the trial against Isabella began in Boston federal court. The courtroom was packed with journalists and other victims. Isabella appeared in a gray suit, attempting to look respectable, but the mask no longer worked. Sarah's testimony was crucial. She recounted the signs she'd caught: the document discovery, the wedding interruption. Isabella's lawyer tried to paint her as a jealous domestic with delusions of importance, but the facts were incontrovertible. During the trial, chilling details emerged. Isabella had already started slipping sedatives into Marcus's coffee to make him more malleable. The plan included possibly actually eliminating him if necessary, disguising it as a murder-suicide. Victoria, testifying against Isabella for a reduced sentence, revealed that in Florida, Isabella had nearly killed another husband with poison. The verdict came in December: 22 years for Isabella for attempted fraud, racketeering, and attempted murder. Victoria got 15 years. Richard 5 with probation. Meanwhile, the Sterling family rebuilt. Marcus had promoted Sarah to household manager with substantial raise, but more than money was the respect earned. He'd started therapy to process the trauma. Emma showed surprising resilience, saying she was happy Isabella was gone, because now Daddy smiled for real. Christmas was quiet but meaningful. While decorating the tree, Emma said something that moved everyone. Sarah was already her real mom, even without marrying Daddy. Marcus looked at Sarah in that moment and saw her for the first time not as an employee, but as the woman who'd always protected his family. In the new year, the family established a foundation to help romance scam victims. Sarah became vice president, using her experience to help others recognize manipulation signs. A German businessman, nearly killed by Isabella years before, personally thanked her for finally getting justice. Isabella repeatedly tried contacting Marcus from prison, first with legal threats, then asking forgiveness, finally offering to return money for sentence reduction. Marcus never responded. For him, she'd died the day of the failed wedding. A year after the failed wedding, the Breakers' estate had been transformed into a recovery center for psychological abuse victims run by the Sterling Foundation. Sarah had completed a behavioral criminology course, becoming a sought-after expert in America for emotional manipulation cases. Emma, now 9, showed surprising maturity, but remained a child protected by her father's and Sarah's love. Marcus had taken back control of the company, implementing security protocols in hotels to protect wealthy guests from scammers. During a psychological security conference, Marcus had a realization watching Sarah speak with competence and passion. He finally saw her not as an employee, but as a woman he deeply admired. That evening, he confessed he'd understood what true love was. Not the blinding passion for Isabella, but the constant warmth of someone who protects you in difficult moments. Sarah admitted having feelings for him, always suppressed for professionalism. They decided to proceed slowly, with Emma at the center of priorities. The child, with precocious wisdom, commented she was happy they were dating but not too much. 6 months later, during a vacation in Aspen, they kissed for the first time. It wasn't the fairy tale kiss with Isabella, but real and deep, built on mutual respect. From prison came news of Isabella attempting to seduce guards and social workers, unable to change. Victoria, however, collaborated with authorities, showing repentance. In a letter to Sarah, she wrote that the nanny's courage had made her reflect on how she'd become a monster. The foundation grew, receiving calls from across America. Sarah developed an early identification protocol for romantic scammers, adopted by several police departments. One particular case. They saved an elderly widow in Charleston from marrying a scammer, showing all the warning signs. The second Christmas after the failed wedding brought important news. Not a marriage. That could wait. But an adoption. Sarah would legally adopt Emma. When the judge asked the child if she wanted Sarah as her legal mother, Emma responded, "Can I call her Mom instead of Sarah?" The courtroom erupted in applause. 5 years after the interrupted wedding, the Breakers' conference room was full again, but for a different reason. They were celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Sterling Mitchell Foundation for Emotional Fraud Prevention, which had saved hundreds of people and recovered millions for victims. Sarah, now executive director, presented the annual report. Beside her, Marcus managed finances, having transformed family hotels into victim support centers. Emma, 14, brilliant and confident, had just won a school prize for an app helping identify fake social media profiles. The family had found its balance. Marcus and Sarah had married 3 years earlier in an intimate mountain ceremony. Emma had been maid of honor, proud to see her parents, as she now considered them both, officially unite. During the conference, a special guest was announced, Detective Chen, now commissioner, presenting national data. Thanks to the Foundation's work, romance scam cases in America had decreased 40%. The Mitchell Protocol had become standard in investigations, but the real surprise came with a letter from Victoria, who from prison, sentence reduced for cooperation, wrote to thank the Foundation. She'd participated in psychological recovery, finally understanding the toxic mechanisms that led her to that life. She was studying psychology and hoped, once free, to help others. Isabella, however, had been transferred to maximum security after another manipulation attempt. She'd seduced and blackmailed the first prison's director, attempting an escape that failed at the last moment. Her sentence was extended to 30 years. She remained incorrigible, a case study in psychopathology manuals. During the gala lunch, Sarah noticed an elderly couple who seemed out of place, modestly dressed among all the elegant attire. She approached and discovered they were the parents of one of Isabella's first victims, the man who'd committed suicide in Florida. They'd come to thank her, to say knowing Isabella was in prison gave them peace. Emma, who'd inherited Sarah's empathy and Marcus's determination, stood to give an unplanned speech. She spoke of how Isabella's attempt had paradoxically strengthened her family, how she'd learned true love shows in daily actions, not grand declarations. She thanked Sarah for showing her courage sometimes simply means telling the truth when everyone wants you to be silent. That evening, as they drove home, Marcus watched Sarah and Emma sleeping against each other in the back seat. Looking at them in the rearview mirror, he reflected on how unpredictable life could be. The day meant to be the happiest had become one of the most traumatic, yet from that trauma had grown deeper, truer happiness. Sarah's phone rang. A new case. A professor in Boston suspected her fiancé wasn't who he claimed. Sarah took notes, while Emma, now awake, already started researching on her tablet. Marcus smiled. This was their life now, saving others from the abyss they'd almost fallen into. The last scene shows all three in the home office late at night, working on the Boston case. Emma finds discrepancies in the supposed fiancé's photos. Sarah analyzes behavioral patterns. Marcus traces suspicious financial movements. They're a team, a family, united not by blood or legal documents, but by something stronger: the daily choice to protect and love each other. Outside the window, the Atlantic Ocean reflected the full moon, the same ocean that had witnessed their darkest moment. But now it represented something else: resilience, rebirth, the human capacity to transform poison into medicine. Sarah's story, the nanny who saved the Sterlings, had become legend in Manhattan's high society circles. But, for Sarah herself, it was simply the story of a woman who did what needed to be done when it needed doing. True heroism, she'd learned, isn't in grand gestures, but in the daily determination to protect those we love. And as they prepared the plan to expose the new Boston scammer, Sarah reflected on how life had taken her from invisible nanny to amateur detective, from employee to wife and mother, from silent witness to voice of courage. Isabella had tried to destroy a family for money. Instead, she'd inadvertently created something far more precious: a family united by adversity, a foundation saving lives, and proof that sometimes the humblest person in the room can be the one who changes everything. The circle had closed. The fraudulent wedding had led to an authentic marriage. Manipulation had generated truth. The attempt at destruction had created something indestructible. And in that house by the ocean, as they worked together to save another victim, the Sterling Mitchell family was living proof that true love can't be faked, bought, or stolen. It can only be built day by day, with trust, respect, and the courage to protect what truly matters. Like if you believe the courage to speak truth can save lives. Comment if you've ever had doubts about someone but didn't dare speak up. Share to help others recognize manipulation signs. Subscribe for more stories of courage and justice. Because in the end, it's not princes who save princesses, nor princesses who save princes. It's ordinary people, those who observe in silence and have the courage to speak at the right moment, who save everyone. And sometimes the nanny who seemed invisible is the hero no one expected.